Even to folks who have been around a while, the proxy plumbing stuff can be challenging to keep track of. One common area of mistakes, knowing the difference between proxy cards, voter instruction forms, annual meeting ballots, and notices of internet availability. Today on Zippy Point.
Quick Zips by Zippy Point.
Quick and dirty. I'm Brock Romanek and I'm a big fan of yous. All right, so this will be somewhat of a quick zip video, so buckle up. Proxy card. A proxy card is a mechanism that companies use to allow shareholders to vote in advance of a shareholders meeting for the items to be voted upon at the meeting so that you can vote without being physically present at the meeting. A big convenience. So technically, shareholders who execute the proxy card are giving authority and instructions to the persons listed on the card as their proxy about how their vote should be cast. Nearly all votes are cast in advance of annual meetings this way, so companies know well before their shareholders meeting how the items on the ballot, how the agenda items, whether they're going to pass easily or fail miserably in nearly all cases. Shareholders who cast votes via instructions on proxy cards are called record holders, also known as registered owners. The proxy card is required to be filed with the SEC. Typically, that happens when the company files its definitive proxy statement. The form of proxy card is dictated by the SEC's Rule 14A4, which I cover in a separate Vid-Guide, a link to which is beneath this video. So then let's talk about the VIF, a voting instruction form, more commonly known as a VIF, is what is used to cast most of the votes at the shareholders meeting, which is funny to even say because most people would assume that most votes are cast by proxy cards. The term VIF just isn't bandied about as much as proxy card. That's because beneficial owners, also known as street holders or retail owners, cast their vote instructions on these VIFs, on these voter instruction forms. They don't use proxy cards. That's for registered owners. That's for record holders. The VIF looks very similar to the proxy card. The main exception is that it doesn't have the language appointing the people who serve as the company's proxy. And there's a whole process where companies share their draft proxy card with Broadridge, who then prepares the VIF, since Broadridge is the entity that collects the VIFs back from the beneficial owners, since they are hired by most of the brokers and the banks out there to act as the middle person between record holders and beneficial owners. Institutional investors typically use Broadridge's Proxy Edge platform to vote their VIFs and their proxy cards. And then other shareholders, retail holders typically, are using Broadridge's Proxy Vote platform. There's a separate Vid-Guide that more fully explains Broadridge's intermediary role. It's complicated and explaining the role doesn't really fit within the purpose of this Vid-Guide. So unlike proxy cards, which are directly regulated by the SEC's proxy rules, a broker and bank's obligation to beneficial owners are largely imposed by the applicable self-regulatory agent. So VIFs are governed by the NYSE's rules, the New York Stock Exchange rules, and VIFs are not required to be filed with the SEC, which is kind of funny because this sample VIF is actually posted on the SEC site. Annual meeting ballot. So most people vote in advance of the annual shareholders meeting. Even if they're one of the few people who bothered to attend the meeting in person or online, they typically do vote in advance anyways. They're just attending the meeting to hear their proceedings, to catch up and hear what management has to say, if the directors have anything to say, what the Q&A is all about, if, to the extent there's an extensive Q&A at the meeting, which is pretty rare. For those shareholders who do show up in person at an annual shareholders meeting and they do want to vote there, they cast their votes using a written ballot, the annual meeting ballot. This ballot is handed out at the annual meeting and contains content very similar to the proxy card, but like a VIF, it doesn't contain the language about designating someone as a proxy. You don't need that because you're actually at the meeting voting. And like VIFs, the annual meeting ballot is not filed with the SEC. So now let's talk about the notice of internet availability of proxy materials. Here's where most people get confused the most, where they get tripped up. When companies are using e-proxy, also known as notice and access, and that's most companies, they're required to send out a notice of internet availability of proxy materials. So without getting too deep into the e-proxy rules, Rule 14A16, most companies choose the notice only option, which requires those companies to send a separate notice to shareholders indicating that the proxy materials are available on a specified website and explaining how to access those proxy materials. The SEC's rules, the proxy rules, require this notice to get sent out. And then shareholders get it and they assume this is how they're supposed to vote on this notice of internet availability. And that's just not the case. It's a separate notice. It's not a proxy card. It's not a VIF. It's not a way to vote. So Rule 14A16A1 requires that companies send this notice to the shareholders at least 40 calendar days before the shareholder meeting. And that means you need to get information to Broadridge about 5 days before that so that they can be prepared to deliver this notice of internet availability of proxy materials. And like I said, here's where people get tripped up. The proxy notice, this notice, is intended to make shareholders merely aware that their proxy materials are available on a specified website. And it's not a proxy card. It's not a VIF. You can't vote with it. In fact, Rule 14A16D2 specifically requires the notice to indicate on it that it is not a form for voting. You not only can't deliver it with a proxy card or VIF, this notice of internet availability has to be delivered at least 10 days before the proxy card or VIF get delivered. Crazy, huh? And this is a thing that you do file with the SEC. So you don't want to forget to file your notice of internet availability of proxy materials with the SEC. It gets forgotten a lot because it must be filed no later than the date on which it is first sent to shareholders. This is often overlooked. So it should be filed as additional proxy soliciting materials, as supplemental materials. It's typically not filed with the proxy card or the proxy statement because those are filed a little bit later. Anyway, all of this is when a company chooses the notice-only delivery framework of e-proxy. Full set delivery, another option under e-proxy, varies somewhat, with the notice of internet availability typically being incorporated into the proxy statement and proxy card. Anyways, let me know what you think.